that fence comes down by noon tomorrow, or I will personally have your house condemned for violating community covenants. This beach is HOA property, Mr. Thorne, and you are trespassing on our collective goodwill. The voice, a grating mix of saccharine condescension and rusted steel, belonged to Karen Miller, president of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association. She stood on my newly laid sod, a plus-sized empress in a floral muumuu, clutching a clipboard to her chest like a holy text. Her face was a mask of pursed-lipped indignation, her eyes tiny, glittering beads of pure, unadulterated power lust. Behind her, the morning sun glinted off the calm waters of Lake Cypress, the very reason my wife, Amelia, and I had sunk every penny of our savings and my military pension into this 3-acre slice of heaven. The fence in question wasn't some monstrous chain-link monstrosity. It was a tasteful, 4-foot cedar split-rail fence, running precisely along the property line demarcated on the survey I'd had done 3 separate times before closing. It was a line that, according to the county clerk's office and a deed change stretching back to 1923, unequivocally included the 50-foot stretch of sandy shoreline currently under dispute. Karen, however, operated under a different set of laws, ones written in the invisible ink of her own entitlement. I looked from her furious face to the fence, then to the small, private beach beyond it, where I'd planned to teach my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, how to fish. I thought about the years I spent in the Army Corps of Engineers, designing and building things that were meant to last, things that were governed by physics and blueprints, not by the whims of a neighborhood tyrant. A slow, cold calm settled over me, the kind that always came before a storm. I gave her a simple, level stare. "This fence," I said, my voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "is on my property, and it's not going anywhere." Her face went from pink to a dangerous shade of crimson. "We'll see about that," she hissed, spinning on her heel with surprising agility and marching back toward her golf cart, which she drove everywhere, even the 200 feet from her house to mine. As she sped away, leaving angry divots in my new lawn, I felt the first tremor of a war I hadn't asked for, but was now fully prepared to win. This was the moment everything changed, the moment my quiet retirement became a battleground. If you're watching this, you probably know what it feels like to have someone try to take what's yours, to have your peace shattered by someone who thinks a title on a neighborhood newsletter makes them a queen. Do me a favor, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss a single update on this fight, and drop a comment below telling me where you're from and what your own HOA nightmare story is. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you how we got here, and more importantly, how I plan to finish it. My journey to this lakeside property was a long one. 25 years in the Corps of Engineers, from dusty forward operating bases in Afghanistan to flood-ravaged deltas in Southeast Asia. I'd seen the best and worst of humanity, managed billion-dollar infrastructure projects, and negotiated with men who carried rifles instead of clipboards. My retirement wasn't about surrender. It was about finally claiming a piece of peace for my family. Amelia had been the rock through it all, raising Lily mostly on her own during my longer deployments. This house, this land, this lake, it was my promise to them. A promise of stability, of quiet mornings and lazy afternoons, of a life uninterrupted by distant wars or sudden orders. Before we even made an offer, I spent a week at the county records office. I'm a surveyor by trade and a colonel by habit. Due diligence is etched into my DNA. I traced the property's lineage, deed by deed, plat by plat. The original parcel was a massive 500-acre farm, subdivided in the late 1980s to create Lakeside Meadows. The developer, a man named Henderson, had been meticulous. The parcel I was buying, Lot 1, was unique. It was the original farmhouse plot, and its property lines were drawn to include the prime stretch of beach, a grandfathered right that predated the subdivision itself. The HOA's governing documents, which I read all 212 pages of, mentioned community access to lake amenities, but it was vague, legally non-binding language. There was no platted community beach, no dedicated easement across my land. The other residents had simply gotten used to using it over the years, a custom that had morphed, in Karen's mind, into an undeniable right. I knew this would be a potential friction point. The seller, a sweet old woman whose husband had passed, even mentioned it. The HOA president, Karen, can be a bit territorial about the beach, she'd warned, her voice trailing off. I'd smiled and assured her I could handle it. I'd handled warlords. I figured I could handle a retired Tupperware saleswoman with a Napoleon complex. I was, as it turned out, dangerously underestimating my opponent's capacity for unreasoning, relentless aggression. The first volley in Karen's war arrived 3 days after our initial confrontation, delivered by a certified letter that cost me a signature and the postman a sympathetic grimace. Inside was a crisp, professionally printed violation notice. The fine was $500 for an unapproved structural addition, payable within 10 days. It cited HOA Bylaw 147, which pertained to fences, walls, and other visual barriers, a second violation, for impeding access to a designated community amenity, carried an additional fine of $1,000. This one cited no bylaw at all, just a vague reference to the founding principles of the Lakeside Meadows community. Attached was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my fence, taken from a low angle to make it look as imposing as possible. I laid the letter on my kitchen island, the heavy bond paper feeling like a formal declaration of hostilities. Amelia came and stood beside me, her hand on my shoulder. "What are you going to do, Marcus?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. I looked out the window at the fence, then at Lily playing on the swing set we'd just finished building. My daughter deserved to grow up in a home, not on a battlefield. "The right thing," I said, turning to my wife. "I'm going to follow the rules." Her rules. I spent that afternoon drafting my official response. I wasn't going to get emotional or angry. I was going to be procedural, precise, and suffocatingly thorough. I addressed the first violation by including a copy of my permit application for the fence, which, according to Bylaw 1472, had to be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee, or ARC. I had submitted it a full 30 days before construction began, via registered mail, to the official HOA mailing address. I included the mail receipt. The bylaw, which I quoted verbatim, stated that if the ARC did not respond with a denial or request for modification within 30 days, the project was deemed automatically approved. It had been 34 days. I had my automatic approval. For the second violation, the one about impeding access, I was even more direct. I attached a notarized copy of my property survey, the official plat map from the county, and the relevant page from my deed. I highlighted the meets and bounds description that clearly encompassed the shoreline. I then wrote, "As the land in question is legally deeded private property, it cannot be classified as a community amenity without a formal, recorded easement, of which none exists. Therefore, no access has been impeded. As no right of access was ever legally established, I sent my response via certified mail, return receipt requested, and I also sent a copy to every other member of the HOA board via email, whose addresses I found in the community directory. I wanted witnesses." The response from Karen was swift and silent. The fines doubled. A new letter arrived a week later. "Failure to remediate," it declared in bold red letters. The total was now $3,000, with a threat of a lien being placed on my property if not paid within 30 days. This time, there was no pretense of legal justification. It was a brute force attack, a clear message that the rules didn't matter, only her power did. That's when the second phase of her campaign began, the social isolation. Suddenly, the friendly waves from neighbors stopped. People I'd had pleasant chats with at the community mailbox would now avert their eyes and hurry past. A rumor started circulating that I was a litigious ex-military bully, trying to steal the beach from their children. One afternoon, I found a bag of dog waste tossed over my new fence, landing near the patio. Another morning, someone had spray-painted HOA thief in childish letters on the asphalt at the end of my driveway. Amelia was shaken, and Lily started asking why the other kids wouldn't play with her at the community pool. The anger that had been simmering in my chest began to harden into something cold and sharp. Karen wasn't just attacking my property anymore. She was attacking my family. She was trying to turn my promise of a peaceful home into a prison. She had mistaken my calm, procedural approach for weakness. It was time to remind her what a man with my training and resources could do when he was no longer interested in being polite. It was time to stop defending and start attacking. My first move was to fortify my position, both legally and physically. I installed a comprehensive security system with high-definition cameras covering every inch of my property line. The next bag of dog waste or can of spray paint would come with a clear shot of the perpetrator's face, ready for a police report. Next, I retained the best real estate attorney in the state, a man named Ben Carter, an old friend from my West Point days who now ran a boutique firm that specialized in taking on corrupt HOAs. I sent him my entire file: the deeds, the surveys, the HOA documents, the violation notices, my responses, and the new, lien-threatening letter. Ben's response came in a phone call that evening. "Marcus, this is beautiful," he said, and I could hear the predatory grin in his voice. "This Karen woman is the gift that keeps on giving. She's violated about 6 different state statutes on fair housing practices and debt collection, not to mention her own bylaws. The lack of a specific bylaw for that second fine is a fatal flaw. This is harassment, pure and simple. We can sue her and the board into oblivion." I told him to hold off on filing anything just yet. A lawsuit was a bazooka, and I wasn't ready to level the whole village. My goal wasn't to burn Lakeside Meadows to the ground. It was to remove the cancer at its heart. I wanted to give Karen every possible opportunity to hang herself with her own rope. "I need more intelligence, Ben," I told him. "I need to understand the terrain." For the next 2 weeks, I became a scholar of Lakeside Meadows. I didn't just read the current HOA documents. I drove to the state capitol and pulled the original articles of incorporation from 1988. I cross-referenced them with the developer's final plans filed with the county. I found what I was looking for in a dusty archive box: the developer's intent statement. It explicitly stated that the lakeside lots, particularly Lot 1, were sold as premium waterfront parcels with exclusive riparian rights, and that the designated community area was the clubhouse, pool, and a small, man-made pond on the opposite side of the development. The beach was never part of the deal. The HOA's claim was built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated bluff. But that wasn't the most interesting thing I found. I started digging into the board's meeting minutes, which they were legally required to post on their clunky website. They were mostly boilerplate, but I noticed a pattern. Any expenditure over $5,000 required a board vote. Yet there were numerous landscaping and maintenance contracts for tens of thousands of dollars with no recorded vote. The contractor for all these projects was a company called Miller's Lawn and Garden. A quick search of state business records revealed the owner, one Daniel Miller, Karen's husband. It was a classic self-dealing scheme, using HOA funds to enrich her own family. The whispers from my few remaining friendly neighbors began to make sense. Old Mr. Henderson from down the street told me how Karen had forced him to resod his entire lawn using her husband's company, threatening him with fines when he'd wanted to use a more affordable local kit. A young couple, the Garcias, told me how they were fined monthly for their children's basketball hoop until they paid Miller's Lawn and Garden an exorbitant fee to plant a visual barrier of shrubs. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry president. She was running a racket. This was no longer about a fence. This was about liberating an entire community from a petty dictator. My strategy shifted. I needed to expose her not just as a bully, but as a crook. I started documenting everything, creating a meticulous timeline of events, cross-referencing violation notices with the HOA's own financial statements. The picture that emerged was damning. Karen Miller wasn't just enforcing rules. She was inventing them to generate revenue for her husband's business. The fence on my property was a threat not because it blocked access, but because it represented a homeowner who wouldn't be extorted, a homeowner who actually read the rules and understood his rights. I was the loose thread that could unravel her entire tapestry of corruption, and I was about to start pulling. The perfect opportunity to spring my first trap came in the form of another certified letter. It was a notice for a special meeting of the board of directors. The agenda was singular: to discuss and vote upon the levying of a punitive fine and the placement of a property lien against Lot 1 for continued and willful violation of community standards. She was escalating, trying to make an official, public example of me. It was exactly what I wanted. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room with fluorescent lighting, folding chairs, and the faint smell of chlorine from the adjacent pool. About 30 residents were there, a mix of Karen's loyal cronies, curious onlookers, and a few cowed souls I knew had also been victims of her reign. Karen sat at the head table, flanked by the 2 other board members, a timid, elderly man named Arthur who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, and a woman named Brenda who served as Karen's sycophantic echo. I took a seat in the front row, my briefcase resting on my lap. I had dressed for the occasion in a crisp suit, a silent signal that this was not a casual neighborhood chat. When my agenda item came up, Karen launched into a prepared speech, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. She painted me as an outsider, a hostile force who had come to disrupt their harmonious way of life. She spoke of tradition, of the community spirit that I was single-handedly destroying by hoarding the beach for myself. For 20 years, our children have built sandcastles on that shore, she said, her voice trembling with theatrical emotion. For 20 years, families have gathered there to watch the sunset. This man, in his arrogance, believes his piece of paper is more important than our community's heart. A few of her supporters nodded in agreement. I let her finish, watching her performance with a detached, analytical calm. When she finally turned to me, her expression was one of smug triumph. "Mr. Thorne, do you have anything to say before the board votes?" "I do," I said, standing up. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a slim binder. "First, I'd like to enter into the official record of this meeting my formal response to the initial violations, which established that my fence was, by the HOA's own bylaws, automatically approved, and that the land in question is my private property. I have a signed certified mail receipt showing the board received this response 4 weeks ago." I placed a copy on the table in front of her. She glared at it as if it were a venomous snake. "Second," I continued, my voice calm and clear, projecting to every corner of the room, "I'd like to address the matter of community tradition. While I appreciate the sentiment, tradition does not supersede legally recorded property deeds. I have here a copy of the original developer's intent statement from 1988, filed with the state, which explicitly designates this beach as part of a private, premium parcel, and not as a community amenity." I placed that document next to the first. A murmur went through the crowd. This was information they had never heard. "And finally," I said, my gaze sweeping across the room to meet the eyes of my neighbors, "this dispute has never been about a beach. It's about the selective and punitive enforcement of rules for financial gain." Karen shot to her feet. "That is an outrageous and slanderous accusation. You are out of order." "Am I?" I asked, turning a page in my binder. "According to Bylaw 83, any non-budgeted expenditure over $5,000 requires a full board vote. I have reviewed the last 3 years of meeting minutes. I see no recorded votes for the $22,000 contract for spring planting in 2021, the $18,000 contract for pool deck resurfacing in 2022, or the $31,000 contract for common area tree removal earlier this year. All of which, according to state records, were awarded to a company owned by the president's husband." The room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the cheap linoleum floor. Arthur, the timid board member, suddenly looked ill. Brenda's sycophantic smile had vanished, replaced by a look of panic. Karen's face was a mottled mess of purple and white. "This meeting is about the lien on Lot 1, she shrieked, banging her gavel on the table. "We will vote on that now. All in favor?" She and Brenda raised their hands immediately. Arthur hesitated, his hand trembling, before slowly raising it halfway. "The motion passes," Karen declared, her voice cracking. "This meeting is adjourned, but the damage was done. I hadn't won the vote, but I had won the war for public opinion. As people filed out, they weren't looking at me as the villain anymore. They were looking at Karen with suspicion and dawning comprehension. Several people, including Mr. Henderson and the Garcias, stopped to quietly shake my hand. They had seen the truth. I had planted the seeds of rebellion. And as for the lien, I wasn't worried. Karen thought she had won the battle, but she had just handed me my most powerful weapon yet, a recording of the entire meeting, including her illegal refusal to address my evidence and her procedurally flawed vote, captured by a small digital recorder in my jacket pocket. Her victory was a fraud, and I had the proof. The day after the disastrous HOA meeting, my phone started ringing. It was the Garcias, the young couple who had been strong-armed into using Karen's husband's landscaping service. Then it was a retired accountant named David Chun, who had been warring with Karen for 2 years over the precise shade of beige on his mailbox. One by one, the silent, oppressed majority of Lakeside Meadows began to find their voice. I invited them over that weekend. We sat on my patio, the infamous fence a quiet backdrop to our discussion. They shared their stories, a litany of petty tyrannies and financial extortion. David Chun had already done a preliminary analysis of the HOA budget and found what he called gaping holes in creative accounting. The Garcias had kept the invoice from Miller's Lawn and Garden, which charged them 3 times the market rate for a few azalea bushes. We had motive, means, and now, a growing list of witnesses. We formed a small, informal committee for HOA transparency. Our first act was to draft a formal petition, citing specific bylaws Karen had violated, demanding a special election to recall the entire board, and calling for an independent, third-party forensic audit of the HOA's finances for the past 5 years. We needed signatures from 25% of the homeowners to force the issue. It was a high bar, but for the first time, it felt achievable. While my newfound allies began discreetly canvassing the neighborhood, I went back to the archives, this time with a new, more ambitious goal. Ben Carter, my attorney, had planted an idea in my head. HOAs are creatures of contract, he'd said. Their power is derived entirely from the covenants recorded with the land. But those covenants are only as strong as the land rights they're built on. Dig deeper, Marcus. Go back to the beginning. Before the developer, before the farm. What was there first? So I did. I spent days sifting through dusty, pre-war county maps and handwritten ledgers. It was tedious, eye-straining work. And then I found it. It was a survey map from 1902, when the entire area was nothing but timberland owned by a railroad company. The map detailed the creation of a single, unpaved access road from the main county highway back to a proposed logging camp. That road was designated as a private easement, granted by the railroad to the logging company for a term of 100 years. That logging camp eventually failed, and the land was sold to the farmer who would later own the 500-acre parcel. The road remained, the only way in or out. Over the decades, it was paved and widened, but its legal status was never changed. The developer, Mr. Henderson, had clearly overlooked it. The county had overlooked it. The original HOA board had overlooked it. Everyone assumed it was a public road, but it wasn't. The easement had expired in 2002. For the last 2 decades, every single resident of Lakeside Meadows, including Karen Miller, had been trespassing to get to their own homes. And who now controlled the underlying land on which that defunct easement sat? I traced the chain of title with trembling hands. The railroad sold it to the farmer. The farmer's massive parcel was subdivided, but the road itself was never formally sectioned off or dedicated to the county. It was legally considered part of the original, primary parcel from which all others were carved. It was part of Lot 1. My lot. My land. I leaned back in my chair in the dusty county records room, a slow, grim smile spreading across my face. Karen Miller thought she was putting a lien on my house. She was threatening my 3 acres. I, on the other hand, now effectively controlled the only legal access to her house, her friends' houses, the entire 150-home subdivision. The title of this story might be a bit of an exaggeration, but in that moment, in the context of our little war, I essentially owned the county road. Karen had been fighting me over a 50-foot strip of sand. I was about to drop a nuclear bomb on her entire world. The thought was terrifying and deeply, darkly satisfying. I had the ultimate leverage, a weapon of such overwhelming power that using it would change everything. The question now was not if I would use it, but how. The strategy had to be flawless, a legal checkmate from which there was no escape. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about a surgical removal of a corrupt leadership and a restoration of order. I met with Ben Carter and laid out the entire discovery on his polished mahogany conference table. He stared at the 1902 map, then at the current county plat, a low whistle escaping his lips. "My God, Marcus," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "This is the Holy Grail. A title lawyer's wildest dream. You could be a very, very rich man. You could charge every resident a toll to get to their own house. That's not the plan, Ben," I said firmly. "I'm not Karen. This is leverage, not a shakedown. This is how we end it, cleanly and decisively." We spent the next week crafting the plan. It would be a 2-pronged attack. The first was a quiet, professional letter drafted by Ben's firm. It was addressed to the Lakeside Meadows HOA Board of Directors and copied to the county administrator and the county sheriff. The letter calmly and factually laid out the legal status of Lakeside Meadows Drive, the single-access road. It cited the original 1902 easement, its expiration in 2002, and the fact that the underlying land was legally part of my deeded property. It then formally notified all parties that, as the legal owner, I was granting a temporary, 90-day license for residents to continue using the road. At the end of 90 days, if a permanent access solution was not reached, a gate would be installed, and access would be restricted to emergency services only. The letter concluded by stating my willingness to grant a permanent, formal public dedication of the road to the county in exchange for 3 simple conditions. 1. The immediate voiding of all fines and the removal of the lien against my property. 2. A formal, written apology from the board to be distributed to all homeowners for the harassment campaign against my family. And 3. The board's full cooperation with an independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances. We sent the letter via courier, ensuring Karen would receive it in the middle of the day. The second prong of the attack was the community petition. My allies had been working tirelessly, and they had collected signatures from nearly 40% of the homeowners, far exceeding the 25% threshold. We held that petition back. It was our ace in the hole. The letter was the shock, the petition was the awe. We wanted to see how Karen would react to the initial blow. I didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour after the courier delivered the notice to her house, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. "You son of a bitch. You think you can threaten me? This is my community. I will destroy you." I saved a screenshot. More texts followed, each more unhinged than the last. She accused me of terrorism, of extortion, of being an enemy of the people. It was a complete, ego-driven meltdown, a beautiful, self-incriminating digital record of her instability. I forwarded every single one to Ben. The next day, a special emergency newsletter, printed on lurid red paper, appeared on every resident's doorstep. In it, Karen wildly misrepresented my letter. She claimed I was a corporate raider attempting to seize control of the neighborhood, and that I was demanding exorbitant payments from every homeowner for road access. She called for a community defense fund, to hire lawyers to fight me, and urged everyone to call the police to report my terroristic threats. She was pouring gasoline on the fire, convinced the community would rally behind her against the common enemy she had invented. It was a fatal miscalculation. She had forgotten one crucial thing. I had been telling the truth, and my truth was backed by 100 years of legal documents. Her truth was backed by nothing but her own blustering rage. The battle lines were drawn. She had her red paper and her lies. I had my maps, my deeds, and my 90-day clock, which was now ticking. Karen's next move was exactly as foolish and predictable as I had hoped. 2 days after her hysterical red newsletter, a county sheriff's patrol car pulled into my driveway. A deputy, a tall man with a calm demeanor and a name tag that read Sergeant Miller, no relation, thankfully, got out of his car and walked up my driveway. I met him on the porch, a mug of coffee in my hand. Karen was standing on the edge of her lawn across the street, arms crossed, watching with an expression of vindictive glee. This was her show of force, her attempt to use the authority of the law to intimidate me. "Mr. Thorne?" the sergeant asked, his eyes polite but observant. "I'm Sergeant Miller. We received a number of calls from a Mrs. Karen Miller concerning threats you've allegedly made to blockade the main road into this subdivision." "I haven't made any threats, Sergeant," I said calmly. "I have simply notified the relevant parties of a pre-existing legal situation regarding my property." I invited him inside, away from Karen's prying eyes. In my office, I had everything laid out on my desk: the 1902 survey, the expired easement, my deed, the title report, and a copy of the letter my attorney had sent. I walked him through it, step by step. I wasn't an angry resident. I was a landowner explaining a complex title issue. He was a cop, not a real estate lawyer, but he understood evidence. He read the documents carefully, his brow furrowed in concentration. He spent a good 20 minutes looking everything over, tracing the lines on the maps with his finger. Finally, he looked up at me, then glanced out the window toward Karen's house. He let out a long, weary sigh. "Mr. Thorne," he said, "as far as I can tell, this is a civil matter. A very, Very messy one, but a civil one. Your documentation appears to be in order. There's no criminal threat here. You're asserting your property rights." He handed the documents back to me. "My advice. This is going to get ugly. Your neighbor over there seems determined. Make sure you and your lawyer have all your ducks in a row." "We do, Sergeant," I assured him. "Thank you for your time." He nodded, and as he walked back to his car, he stopped and said something to Karen. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see her body language. Her shoulders slumped. Her triumphant posture deflated. The sergeant got in his car and drove away without a backward glance. The public humiliation was palpable. She had called in the cavalry, and they had essentially sided with me. For the first time, her armor of absolute authority had been publicly pierced. Her weapon, using official channels to bully and intimidate, had been turned against her. The fallout was immediate. My phone started ringing again, but this time it was with a different tone. People weren't just angry at Karen, they were scared. "Is it true? Can you really close the road?" one neighbor asked, his voice trembling. I spent the rest of the day on the phone, patiently explaining the situation to anyone who called. I wasn't a hostile actor. I was a property owner who had been attacked and was now using the legal means at his disposal to defend himself. I explained my 3 conditions for dedicating the road, emphasizing that I was asking for no money, only for accountability and the restoration of my family's peace. The narrative was shifting. I wasn't the villain Karen painted me to be. I was the man with a solution. The community, which she had tried to weaponize against me, was now turning on her. They realized she wasn't their protector. She was the one who had put all of their homes at risk through her petty, personal vendetta. That evening, David Chun, the retired accountant, called me. "It's time," he said. "They're ready. Let's release the petition." We emailed a digital copy of the petition, complete with the list of signatures, to every homeowner in Lakeside Meadows, along with a simple cover letter explaining that we were officially calling for a special election to recall the board and authorize a forensic audit. Karen had started a war over a fence. Now she was facing a full-blown revolution. The petition landed like a bombshell in the community's collective inbox. Within an hour, the neighborhood Facebook group, which Karen usually ran as her personal propaganda page, exploded. For years, she had ruthlessly deleted any dissenting comments, but now the tide was too strong. Dozens of homeowners, emboldened by the petition and my stand, began posting their own stories of Karen's abuse of power. The Garcias posted the invoice from her husband's company. Mr. Henderson described the threats he'd received over his lawn. The carefully curated image of a benevolent community leader shattered in a matter of hours, replaced by the ugly reality of a corrupt bully. Karen, in her panic, made another critical error. Instead of addressing the accusations or calling the meeting as required by the bylaws, she declared the petition illegal and fraudulent. She wrote a rambling, all-caps post claiming the signatures were forged and that it was all part of my master plan to destroy Lakeside Meadows. She then summarily banned dozens of residents from the Facebook group, including David Chun and the Garcias. This act of censorship was the final straw. It was a transparent attempt to silence the will of the people she claimed to represent. The next morning, a crowd of about 50 homeowners gathered on the sidewalk in front of the community clubhouse. They weren't shouting or violent. They were simply standing there, holding signs that read, "We signed the petition, hold the vote." "And where's the money, Karen?" The local news, tipped off by someone in the group, sent a camera crew. Karen, trapped in her house, was now not just a neighborhood problem, but a public spectacle. The pressure was immense. The 2 other board members, Arthur and Brenda, cracked first. Arthur, the timid one, posted a public resignation on the Facebook page, stating he could no longer in good conscience be a party to the current board's actions. Brenda, seeing which way the wind was blowing, quickly followed suit, claiming she had been misled by Karen's leadership. With their resignations, the board no longer had a quorum. It was effectively dissolved. According to the bylaws, in such a situation, an emergency election had to be held within 30 days. Karen was utterly alone, her power structure having crumbled beneath her feet. I watched the drama unfold from my office window, feeling a sense of grim vindication. I hadn't orchestrated this protest, but I had created the conditions for it. By standing up, by refusing to be intimidated, I had shown others that it was possible to fight back. The 90-day clock on the road access was still ticking, a constant, silent pressure in the background. The community knew that the only way to resolve that issue was to elect a new, reasonable board who would accept my terms. The choice was clear: embrace transparency and accountability, or risk being literally locked out of their own homes. The campaign for the new board was short and intense. David Chun, the accountant, announced his candidacy for president. The Garcias both ran for board seats. They ran on a simple platform: full financial transparency, fair and consistent rule enforcement, and an end to the culture of intimidation. They were the reformers, the heroes of the story. Karen, incredibly, decided to run for re-election. Her platform was one of fear. She claimed that only she could stand up to the bully Thorne and protect the community from my extortionist demands. She held a small rally on her lawn, attended by a dwindling handful of her most loyal cronies. It was a pathetic sight, the deposed queen trying to rally an army that had already deserted her. The election was held via online ballot over a 48-hour period. The results were overwhelming. David Chun won the presidency with 85% of the vote. The Garcias and two other reform candidates swept the other board seats. Karen received less than 10% of the vote, a humiliating repudiation of her entire reign. The war was over. The people had spoken. My family and I watched the results come in on David's campaign website. When they were finalized, Amelia wrapped her arms around me. "You did it, Marcus," she whispered. "You gave them their neighborhood back." I looked out at the lake, where the sun was setting, casting a golden glow on the water. The fence stood quietly, a simple wooden line in the grass. It had started a war, but it had also become a symbol of something more: the simple, unyielding right to be left alone, to enjoy the peace you've earned. The fight was won, but the terms of surrender still needed to be signed. The first official meeting of the new HOA board was a public event, held on the clubhouse lawn to accommodate the large turnout. It felt less like a board meeting and more like a Liberation Day celebration. David Chun, looking every bit the calm and competent leader, called the meeting to order. The first item on the agenda was resolution of the Lakeside Meadows Drive access issue. David looked directly at me in the crowd and gave me a respectful nod. "The board officially accepts the terms proposed by Mr. Marcus Thorne," he announced, his voice clear and steady. "We will immediately instruct our legal counsel to draft the paperwork for a permanent public dedication of the road. In return, all fines and the lien against the Thorne property are hereby declared null and void. Furthermore, on behalf of the Lakeside Meadows Homeowners Association, I wish to extend a sincere and public apology to the Thorne family for the unwarranted harassment and distress they have endured." A wave of applause rippled through the crowd. It was a moment of profound, cleansing vindication. The second item on the agenda was the forensic audit. The board voted unanimously to hire an independent firm from the city to conduct a full audit of the last 5 years of HOA finances. The third and final item was a vote on a new bylaw proposed by David, which made it a conflict of interest for any board member or their immediate family to hold a contract for services with the HOA. It was promptly named the Anti-Miller Rule. It also passed unanimously. The old regime was not just gone. Its corrupt practices were being systematically dismantled and outlawed. The day after the meeting, a crew from a new, highly regarded landscaping company arrived to begin work on the common areas. They were not owned by Karen's husband. A few days later, a letter arrived at my house. It was on official HOA letterhead. Inside was a short, formal apology, signed by all 5 new board members. Tucked inside was a check for $5,000, with reimbursement for legal fees, written in the memo line. It was more than I had asked for, a gesture of profound goodwill. I finally felt the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for months begin to release. We had our peace back. The most satisfying moment, however, was yet to come. The forensic audit took 6 weeks, and the results were devastating. The auditors uncovered a systematic pattern of bid rigging, fraudulent invoicing, and outright embezzlement totaling over $200,000 over 5 years. Karen and her husband had been treating the HOA's reserve funds as their personal slush fund, using the money for vacations, car payments, and home renovations, all hidden under the guise of landscaping and maintenance expenses. David Chun, as HOA president, had a legal obligation to report the findings. He turned the entire audit report over to the county prosecutor's office. Criminal charges were filed against both Karen and Daniel Miller for fraud, embezzlement, and racketeering. Their house, the one from which she had launched her reign of terror, was seized as part of the asset forfeiture process to help repay the stolen funds. The final act of the drama played out not in the neighborhood, but in a courtroom. Karen, stripped of her power and her ill-gotten wealth, looked small and pathetic at the defendant's table. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 3 years in prison. Her husband received a lesser sentence in exchange for his testimony against her. Justice, it turned out, was not just a concept. It was a tangible, satisfying reality. I didn't attend the sentencing. There was no need. My victory wasn't seeing her punished. It was seeing our community healed. It was the friendly waves from neighbors, the sound of Lily's laughter as she played with the Garcia kids on the beach, my beach, and the quiet, uninterrupted peace of a sunset over the lake. One warm evening, about a year after it all began, I was sitting on my small stretch of private beach, skipping stones across the glassy surface of the lake with Lily. The cedar fence behind us had weathered to a soft silver gray, blending naturally into the landscape. It was no longer a symbol of conflict, but a quiet testament to a battle won and a principle upheld. Amelia came down from the house with a pitcher of lemonade and sat beside me on the sand. We watched Lily chase a frog near the water's edge, her laughter echoing in the quiet air. "You know," Amelia said, leaning her head on my shoulder, "I was so scared when this all started. I thought we'd made a terrible mistake moving here." "I know," I said, putting my arm around her. "There were moments when I thought so, too, but you never showed it," she said. "You were so calm, so methodical. Like you were planning a campaign." I smiled, thinking of the long nights spent in the county archives, the color-coded binders, the strategic release of information. "Old habits," I said. "You identify the objective, you assess the terrain, you gather your intelligence, and you never, ever underestimate your enemy. But you also never use more force than is necessary." David Chun walked down the beach toward us. Since becoming HOA president, he'd become a good friend. He wasn't wearing a suit or carrying a clipboard, just shorts and a t-shirt. He was holding a beer. "Evening, folks," he said with a warm smile. "Don't want to interrupt. Just wanted to let you know the new playground equipment for the community park arrived. The kids are going to love it. We got it paid for with the first round of restitution money from the Miller case." "That's fantastic news, David," Amelia said. "Thank you for everything you're doing. We're all doing it," he said, gesturing around the peaceful neighborhood. "We're a community again, and we have you to thank for that. Marcus, you woke us all up." I just nodded, feeling a humble sense of pride. I hadn't set out to be a hero or a revolutionary. I had just wanted to protect my family and my property. But in doing so, I had inadvertently liberated my neighbors and reminded them that power, especially in a small community, is supposed to flow from the consent of the governed, not from the whims of a tyrant. As David headed back to his own yard, I looked at my home, my family, and my land. The fight had been costly, in time and in stress. But the peace we had now was a peace we had truly earned. It was stronger and more profound than the simple quiet we had initially sought. It was the peace of a just victory, the tranquility that comes from restoring order and defending what is right. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. Lily ran up and threw her arms around my neck, her hair smelling of lake water and summer air. "I love our beach, Daddy," she said. "Me too, sweetheart," I said, holding her tight. "Me too." And as darkness settled over Lakeside Meadows, the only sound was the gentle lapping of the waves against my shore, a quiet, steady rhythm of a hard-won and deeply cherished peace. The fence stood silent guard, a simple line drawn in the sand, a reminder that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought for the simple right to be left alone in your own backyard.